Hello, class. Let's continue with our topic on intertestamental period. So, in the last class, we have already seen the first part or the first three periods of the intertestamental period. Today, we are going to continue and talk about the fourth part of the intertestamental period, that is the Maccabean revolt. Okay, and we are going to also talk about the Roman rule, which will be the fifth part of the intertestamental period or the third class of the intertestamental period. So today we are going to do the second part, that is the Maccabean revolt. Okay, and in the next class we'll be dealing with the Roman rule. Okay, so let's begin without wasting much time. Okay, so let me start sharing the screen. Okay, so as you can see before you is chapter 20. Last class we were doing the chapter 19th, which was the first part of the historical survey of the intertestamental period, part 1. Today we are going to do this 20th lesson, and this lesson has been divided again into two parts. So we will be doing the first part today, that is the second part of the intertestamental period, and we are going to do the second part of this chapter, lesson 20, in the next class. Okay, so let's move ahead. Okay, so this we are going to talk about over here is the Maccabean revolt and rules. Okay, so we have already in the last class, if you remember, we have already come to a portion where we can say Antiochus IV was ruling, and he had started persecution over the Jews, and he had started a decree also where we can say that he was forcing the Jews or basically persecuting the Jews and asked them not to follow their rituals or the offerings and sacrifices and the festivals. And he had torn or destroyed the religious scriptures of the Jews, and he had, established the idol of Zeus god in the temple. He had offered pork in the temple and as a sacrifice, and he was forcing the people to eat pork also. Okay, so this is the background that we are going to continue in. Okay, so this has already happened. This is already taking place according to this scenario that we're going to study today. So with this background, we are going to continue today. Okay, so now we are talking about this very scenario where Antiochus IV is ruling and he is persecuting the Jews. Okay, so now in the middle of this persecution, in the middle of this enforced Hellenism, we can say another man rises up from the Jewish community. Okay, another man named Mattathias. He's a very important figure. Okay, Mattathias. He is the person who actually begins the revolt. Okay, so Mattathias of Modane. He's a priest. He's from the priestly family. Okay, so Mattathias of Modane. He was the head of the Hasmonean tribe, a priest originally from Jerusalem, and he is important because he was asked by Antiochus IV to sacrifice swine in the Greek temple, but he refused. So what Antiochus wanted to do is Antiochus IV Epiphanes, if you remember him, the most cruelest somebody we just talked about in the last class, ended with in the last class. So he was the person who was persecuting the Jews, and uh, so we see that he actually wanted the priest of a Jewish religion. Okay, Jews. He wanted the priest of a Jewish religion to sacrifice or perform offering or sacrifice in pagan altar, that is the Greek temple, and do what? Do sacrifice of swine or pig, which was supposed to be unholy according to the Jewish culture, according to the Hebrew laws. Okay, so his name is Mattathias. Remember his name, Mattathias of Modane. He is from the Hasmonean tribe, and he's priest. He's belonging to the priesthood from originally from Jerusalem. Okay, so what happened when he denied, when he refused that he is not going to perform this sacrifice? Another apostate priest or another झूठा priest अगर हम बोल सकते हैं और बहरूपिया हम बोल सकते हैं. So another priest who is not actually a priest, he accepted to perform this ritual or this sacrifice to of swine in the Greek temple. Now, Mattathias became very angry with this apostate priest because he's not a proper priest, and he actually is a Jew, and he's offering to sacrifice the swine at the altar. So he is actually being part of a Jewish community and accepting to sacrifice swine is something that Mattathias did not like according to the religion. Okay, so Mattathias becomes very angry and he kills that apostate priest. He also killed the officers of the king, and he destroyed the pagan altar and fled to the hills with his family. Okay, so what does he do? This is the beginning of the revolt over here. So because he was asked to sacrifice the swine, he said no, he will not sacrifice the swine. And then another apostate priest comes forward and he performs a sacrifice, which angers Mattathias, who is originally a priest of the Jews. And in his anger, he kills that Jew, and he kills the officers also of the king, and he destroys that pagan altar where the swine was offered, and he fled to the mountains or to the hills with his family. Antiochus IV with army surrounded this Mattathias and his family where they were in the mountains, where they had fled. So Antiochus IV and with his army surrounded them, due to which he and his men and family actually had to flee to the mountains. So he had five sons, and what we see that the whole army of Antiochus gathered around them, gathered around the Jews at that time. So knowing that the Jews do not fight on Sabbath, they attacked them. Then, but the survivors who survived this attack, they decided to fight back and defend. And this decision changed their fortune. Okay, so this is the initial ignitions, or this is the initial fires that were flickering at this moment, which gave rise to this revolt of the Jews against these Greek people. Okay, this Greek kingdom. In 166 BC, Mattathias died. He passed his baton to Judas, his eldest son. Okay, so he passed his, we can say, his reign, or he passed his leadership to Judas, his eldest son. Judas was quite equipped or better equipped military leader. So he was a military leader, he was a strategist, he was a military leader, and he was strong in, we can say, good in fighting, and militarily he was very good. Mattathias was not of this genre, but we can say Judas was well equipped for military. Okay, so he was made the leader of this campaign here. In my first Maccabees chapter 3 verse 4, we see he was like a lion. Okay, we were talking about Judas. So Judas was like a lion in his deeds, like a lion cub roaring for prey. His nickname was Maccabeus, which means hammer or exterminator or the one marked off. And his group was called the Maccabees. So if you now you can associate it with the Maccabees and the book of Maccabees. So Maccabees is talking about them, this Maccabean revolt, and all that takes place in this time. The first attack by Judas was on the Syrian troop, which failed at the hands of of Lysias of Antiochus's army. So Lysias was the general of Antiochus's army, and the first attack was done on the Syrian troops by Judas, and Lysias defeated him. The second attack, Judas defeats Lysias. Okay, the first attack, Lysias defeats Judas. In the second attack, Judas defeats Lysias at Amos, along with some other armies. Now, what does Judas do? Judas now enters the temple at Jerusalem. Remember the temple at Jerusalem where swine was offered to Zeus god, where the idol of Zeus god was installed. Okay, and worship was done of Zeus by this Greek people, by Antiochus IV and his people. So Judas entered the temple at Jerusalem and he removed all the pagan altars. Okay, so he removed all the pagan altars. He dedicated the temple once again. So he dedicated the temple, or he dedicated it, built new altars. Okay, so he removed all the old altars, built or reinstalled new altars, and he made new vessels because those vessels had become unholy because of the sacrifice of this unholy things in that temple. Okay, so he made new vessels, new curtains, placed bread of presence on the table. So he actually cleansed the whole temple in we can say in this time around 166 BC that we can see. So he cleansed the whole temple at that time. In 164 BC, now we can see 3 years after Antiochus IV had profaned the temple on the same day. Okay, on the same day, the Jewish worship was restored. So the day when Antiochus IV had, he had destroyed or profaned the temple, or dishonored the temple by establishing the idol and by offering the sacrifice of swine. After 3 years of that, on the same day, because he had already cleansed the temple, now Judas has already cleansed the temple. So we can see that the Jewish people began to worship once again, and the Jewish worship was restored, sacrifice was resumed, and the new altars. Okay, so rededication of the temple cell was celebrated for 8 days. Judas then fortified Mount Zion with high walls, strong towers, and garrisons to guard it. Guarded from whom? The Greek soldiers. Hasidims were now fading away. Hasidims, if you remember, those pious ones, the pious people, because they were fighting, they were also against all these things that were happening. So they were for not zealots, but they were zealous for the religious life or the spiritual life or the religion at that time. So now we can see that these Hasidims were fading away. They dreamt of independence. Their dream of independence was now in reality because Judas has won. Judas had established the altar. Judas has established the temple once again, and once again the sacrifices are going on, and once again, everything, all the rituals have been restored. So now these Hasidims were satisfied. With this religious independence that they received right now, and because of that, because they were just interested in the religious freedom, not in the political freedom. Okay, so they were satisfied, and because of that, we can see that their revolts and their upsurgings and everything were now fading away, and now they were content and they were relaxed and they were satisfied because now they were allowed to perform their religious rites. So the dream had now become a reality because now they are able to worship with freedom. Religious freedom was supportable, but now Judas wanted political freedom also. So Judas was not satisfied with with only religious freedom. He wanted political freedom also. He wanted his nation to be free from this Greek rule. In 164 BC, Antiochus IV died. Okay, he was the persecutor, and he is the one whom Daniel talks about, as we have mentioned in the last class. So in 164 BC, Antiochus IV Epiphanes also dies. Okay, and because of his death, there was a power struggle which was created in Syria. So because he died, now there was power struggle. Who next? Okay, so we can see now what happens. Judas in this time showed his power. Judas showed his might at this time. So the Greek leaders recognized and realized Jewish religious rights. In 164, edict was withdrawn and Greek control over Judah was loosened. In 10 years, Maccabees controlled the whole of Judah. Okay, so the whole Judah, within 10 years, the Maccabees began to control the whole of the state of Judah. Now, what happens now? Judas dies. And with the death of Judas, we can see the arrival of evil times. Hellenistic wings under alchemists caused bloodshed of many Orthodox Jews in Jerusalem. So, till the time Judas was alive, he did not allow any kind of persecution or torture or any kind of bloodshed of the Jewish fellow men. But when he died, we can see that Hellenism started to rise or take wings once again. And alchemists again, we can see he caused some kind of persecution and bloodshed on the Orthodox Jews in Jerusalem. Now Judas's brother Jonathan succeeded him. Okay, if you remember, this Mattathias had 5 sons. So one by one, four of them are going to become the rulers or leaders. So Judas, the brother of Jonathan, succeeds him. He was popular but not successful against the Seleucids. Okay, he was not a military man. He was not so strategic, but he knew how to handle things. But he was popular because he was Judas's brother, but he was not so successful against the Seleucids as Judas was. Seleucids were actually afraid of Judas, but they were not afraid of Jonathan. There was internal struggle for power now among the Seleucids. Alexander Balas now usurped the power. Okay, he recognized that Jonathan was the leader, and he gave concession to the Jews, recognizing the leadership of Jonathan. He appointed him as the high priest in 153 or 152 BC. He had both. Now we can say Jonathan now, though he was not so capable, but as Judas was, but we can say the struggles or the work of Judas had paid forth, and Jonathan was reaping the harvest of all that, sowing of the seeds of by Judas. So Jonathan was accepted as the leader of the Jews, and he was appointed as a high priest, and he had both the religious and political power, and freedom. Jonathan now helped Balas to fight Demetrius, and he got Ekron in return. Okay, so Demetrius now offered concessions, subsidies, tax exemptions to Jonathan, along with the Accra post. So they both were, Demetrius and we can say Alexander Balas, were both trying to woo or sway Jonathan to their side to get popularity and power. So they both were fighting. Demetrius and Balas were fighting to get the position. Though Balas was actually ruling right now, Demetrius wanted the position. So we can see in among the Seleucids. So we can see that now, because already we can say that Alexander Balas had given concession to the Jews and had promised Ekron, okay, all those things. Now Demetrius rises up and against Balas, and he says that if you side me, if Jonathan sides Demetrius, he would get concessions, more concessions, subsidies, tax exemptions, and also Accra fortress. Jonathan was also recognized by the Syrians, and he became very powerful. Okay, Balas was now defeated by Demetrius, and Jonathan was made the ruler of Jerusalem. Now, Trypho, Balas's general, wanted to place Alexander's son Antiochus VI on the throne. Okay, so Trypho, who was Balas's general, wanted to place Alexander's son on the throne of Antiochus VI. Okay, Alexander's son Antiochus VI on the throne. Okay, instead of Balas. So we can say Jonathan and his brother Simon. Jonathan had another brother now. We are talking about the four brothers, as I have already told. So Jonathan and his brother Simon now sided with Trypho, and they together defeated Demetrius. Trypho coveted throne from the Seleucids. So he now becomes the ruler of the Seleucids. He killed Jonathan, okay, who had become very famous. So he killed Jonathan in 142 BC. And also Simon, last of the five brothers, now becomes the leader. Okay, so after Jonathan, we see the last brother, the youngest brother of all the five brothers. Now he becomes the king in or the ruler of the Jews, or the leader of the Jews in 142 BC. Now Simon leads from 142 BC to 134 BC, and they were then called Hasmonean rule. So till this time they were called the Maccabees revolt, Maccabees, and now we can say now their name changed, and now they became the Hasmonean rule. So it's quite similar. You can Maccabean revolt and Hasmonean revolt is quite similar because it is from the same group of people. So Simon led from 142 BC to 134 BC, and they were called Hasmonean rule. He managed public affairs to Gaza, Joppa, and Jamnia. He joined Antiochus VI against Trypho and was victorious. He was made the high priest. He freed the Jews from the Macedonians and Seleucids after 170 years of Greek rule. So after 170 years of Greek rule, these people gained freedom. Okay, the Jews gained freedom from the Macedonians, and he was made the high priest. That is, Simon was made the high priest. Simon was regarded as a deliverer from the Gentiles. So he delivered the Jews from the hands of the Gentiles. He was made the high priest, the commander of the army, the leader, the ethnarch of the Jews. New dynasty, the Hasmonean dynasty, emerged and it grew powerful. His noticeable acts, we can note some acts of Simon. He captured the Accra fortress and he crushed the Hellenizing parties. That is, whoever tried to Hellenize the Jewish people and their tributaries, we can say he crushed them. He defeated them. Maccabees involved in political matters and in war. So they were not only limited to the religious matters because they have already received religious freedom, but now they involved in political matters and in war also. So they were opposed by the Hasidims because Hasidims were only interested in the religion group. So you have to remember, Hasidims are also Jewish people, Maccabees are also Jewish people. Okay, but Hasidims were the people who were only interested in the religious freedom, and no, they were satisfied and they were not interested in war, any kind of political war. Okay, so now because they were free to worship their God and they had religious freedom, so the Hasidims were fine and they were happy. So they opposed the Maccabees because Maccabees were now fighting for political freedom and political matters. Conflict between Sadducees and Pharisees in the New Testament was a result of the conflict between Maccabees and Hasidims. So the Pharisees were the Hasidim, or the Hasidims became or converted and became the Pharisees, religious people, religious group of people. And Maccabees turned out to be the Sadducees. We can say a group of Sadducees who were more aristocratic, and they were involved in the political matters as well. But both were religious groups. So Hasidims or the Pharisees were not interested in the political issues, but the Sadducees or the Maccabees, they were interested in the political issues as well. So another group opposed the Maccabean political movement at this time, and they became the monastic community in the desert called the Essenes. Okay, so if you remember the Essenes, Essenes were the group of people among whom John the Baptizer was. He grew up near the Dead Sea, if you remember. Okay, so these were another group of religious people who opposed the Maccabean revolt or Maccabean political revolt or movement. So we can see that this monastic community, they settled as a monastic community because they were a religious group of people. So they did not want any kind of this, political rivalry or political war and all those things. So they also opposed the Maccabees against this political movement. Simon first Maccabean to Simon was the first Maccabean to fall victim to internal rivalry and was killed by his son-in-law Ptolemy. Okay, so Simon was the first person, first Maccabean who was killed by his own people. Okay, till now, all the others were killed by the people of the Greek or Syrians and all these people. But Simon was the first Maccabean who was the victim of internal rivalry, means his own people killed him. So he was killed by his son-in-law, whose name was Ptolemy. His son, John Hyrcanus, survived and succeeded him. Whose son? Simon's son. John Hyrcanus succeeded him. He had survived the attack of Ptolemy and he became the ruler now. And John Hyrcanus survived and he succeeded him as the king, and he took upon himself the title of the king. So till now they were not called as kings, but John Hyrcanus called himself a king, and he ruled from 135 to 104 BC. He began to control those not under the Maccabean rule. So what he did was John Hyrcanus. What he did was all those who were not Jews. He started to forcefully convert them into Jews. He gave them two choices: either you become a Jew or you become a refugee. So most of the people accepted becoming a Jew instead of becoming refugee. So most of them came under him as Jews, not as refugees. So many of the people were converted at that time by John Hyrcanus, and he forced forced Jewism on the other group of people also. So they were invaded by Antiochus VII and besieged in Jerusalem. Syrian king imposed taxes. So Antiochus Antiochus VII is the Syrian king now. So he imposed taxes and he took away their cities and occupied or captured the Maccabees. Antiochus VII dies in 129 BC, which led to a dispute again for power or the power struggle between his sons Antiochus 8 and Antiochus 9. Okay, so if you remember, if you understand, their names would continue and only numbers were put. So Antiochus 7, Antiochus 6, Antiochus 8, Antiochus 9. So the generations would continue with the same name, but the numbers would change. Okay, so Antiochus 7 died in 129 BC, and this led to a dispute or rivalry or power struggle between his sons, Antiochus 8 and Antiochus 9, which was his stepson. So after John Hyrcanus' death, his son Aristobulus, okay, his sons Aristobulus, who ruled from 104 to 103 BC, and his another son Alexander Janus, he ruled from 103 to 76 BC. Now let us look at the deeds or the works of these people. So deeds of Hyrcanus before he died. He denied Aristobulus to be the high priest. He made himself popular during his reign in religious and civil powers, and he imprisoned his own mother and brothers because he feared or he was insecure that they may try to usurp the throne. So he was a person, he ruled for a very short period of time. If you remember, from 104, he yeah, so he ruled for from 135 to 104. Okay, he not a short period of time, sorry. He ruled from 135 to 104 BC, so it's around 35 plus for 39 years. He ruled for around 39 years, And in his we can say in his rule, he did a lot of things. He did negative things also. So he tried to gain popularity through not so much positive things. So he denied Aristobulus to be the high priest because he thought that he would take up the position and overrule him. Then he made himself popular by his reign in the religious and civil power. And then he imprisoned his own mother and his own brothers due to insecurity. So now we'll talk about the deeds of Aristobulus, that is Hyrcanus' son. He ruled for around, we can say Aristobulus ruled for around 104 to 103. That is only 1 year. Okay, in this short span, he conquered Galilee and made it a Judean territory. And the remnants were forcefully circumcised. So they were converted forcefully. So the remnants were forcefully circumcised and asked to observe the Jewish laws, though they were Gentiles. So they were forcefully made into Jews, and they were forcefully circumcised and forcefully made to follow the Jewish religious customs and laws. Judaizing was strengthened with the resettlement of the Jews there, and the Pharisaic activity and synagogue building. So he strengthened the Jewish system, and he strengthened after the resettlement of Jews in that place. He strengthened the Pharisaic activity, strengthened the synagogue building, and we see that a lot of religious movement, the Jewish religious movement, was activated or enhanced at the time of Aristobulus. So these deeds of Aristobulus prepared the space for Jesus in Galilee. Okay, so Galilee was prepared because he was converting everybody to be Jews. So these people were not originally Jews, but they were occupants. They were resettled over there. So they were forced to be Jews, and they were circumcised and made to follow the Jewish laws. So that Galilee had become a place where there were Jews, but they were not Jews actually. So it just happened, and he forced, and then it prepared Jesus for Jesus's ministry in that place, and the disciples also. He died 1 year after all these atrocities that he did. Alexander, his brother, succeeded him after that. So Alexander now ruled, we can say Alexander ruled for a longer period of time. Okay, so what were his deeds? Alexander Janus's deeds. He married his brother's widow. That is, he married whose widow, whose wife? Aristobulus' wife. He married Aristobulus' widow, Salome Alexandra. He spread his rule to Moab, Ammon, and Egypt. He fought many wars outside and inside. He took revenge from by killing around 6,000 Jews. So he killed his own people. He killed around 6,000 Jews to take a revenge. Sorry, Jews called his reign as Hellenistic tyranny, reign of terror, or lion. They called him as Lion of Urath. Okay, so they were scared, and he was just devouring the Jews, though he himself was a Jew, we can say, but he was devouring the Jews. Okay, so that was not something very nice, we can say. So he reigned for around 27 years, and he died out of prolonged sickness. Salome had released Aristobulus' three brothers at his death, and she married Alexander at that time. Okay, so when we have to remember that Aristobulus' brothers and his whole family was in jail. They were inside the jail because we have to remember Hyrcanus had put them into all jail. Okay, so he did all those things. So we have to remember that now, before at the death of her husband, when she was about to marry Alexander Janus. So at that time, she released the three brothers of Aristobulus, and then only she got married to Alexander. Okay, so she succeeded after his death and ruled from 76 to 67. So from 76 to 67 was the rule of a woman, that is Salome, the wife of Aristobulus and the wife of Alexander Janus. Alexander had instructed her to make peace with the Pharisees. So she maintained that. This brought internal peace among the Pharisees, and this gave her more power, and the Pharisees had gained upper hand during this period. So that is why we see that the Pharisees have this higher and superior position. So he had appointed his son Hyrcanus too as high priest. Alexander was supported by the Pharisees because he supported them. Pharisees took advantage over the Pharisees. Alexander's younger son Aristobulus too tried to take the throne from Hyrcanus too. With the death of Salome, civil war broke out between the two sons, that is Hyrcanus II and Aristobulus II. Aristobulus II defeats Hyrcanus and ruled for 4 years. Hyrcanus then defeats Aristobulus. Hyrcanus too then defeats Aristobulus too with the help of Antipater, the governor of Idumbia and the Nabatean king. Okay, so now meanwhile we can see that the Roman kingdom is coming up now. Okay, so this Greek rule is going to subside gradually, and now the Roman rule is going to come up. So meanwhile, the Roman general Pompey was advancing towards Judea. Romans were now, gaining power all over the world, or all over this area, we can say, and they were moving towards Judea. Okay, to take control of Judea also gradually. So they were going to defeat these Greco, or these the Syrian and Ptolemy and all these things. They're going to defeat all of them, and gradually they are going to take control and make it into a Roman territory. So meanwhile, all these things were happening, and Hyrcanus and Aristobulus was fighting over each other. And now we can see that, now we can see that Hyrcanus had started ruling with the help of Antipater and Nabatean king. So in these times, we can see that the Roman king, or Roman general Pompey was moving towards Judea. So he took advantage of this internal. Now Pompey also seeing all these things that is happening among the Judean territory, so he took advantage of this friction. He took advantage of this internal conflict. So divide and rule policy, as we can see over there. So he saw that there is a division, and he took advantage of this situation. So he took advantage of the internal conflict and defeats Hyrcanus by siding Aristobulus. Okay, so we have to remember Hyrcanus has recently defeated Aristobulus. Before that, Aristobulus was ruling, and he had defeated Hyrcanus, and he ruled for around 4 years. Now, Hyrcanus too had defeated Aristobulus with the help of Antipater, the governor of Idumbia, and Nabatean king. So Pompey sided with Aristobulus, and we can see that Aristobulus, and then we can see that he defeated, or he removed Hyrcanus from the scene. The Romans then defeat the Romans together, we can say, along with Hyrcanus, along with Aristobulus. They defeat the Seleucids, and they finish them. They finish the Seleucids, or they end the history of Seleucids in 64 BC. So with this, we can say this conflict and the Seleucid kingdom comes to an end. So Aristobulus and Hyrcanus both sent requests to support. Okay, so they both were requesting Pompey, or the Roman rule, to support them. Okay, but he denied both of them. So Pompey denied both of their requests. Aristobulus tried to bribe Pompey, but he failed and returned to Judah. Pompey attacked Jerusalem, and he took Aristobulus as a prisoner. Jerusalem came under Roman control with this, because Aristobulus was now under the Roman rule, that is Pompey, and now Jerusalem becomes a part of Roman control. Okay, so it has taken control over the Jerusalem. So freedom gained by the Maccabean revolt at the expense of many lives lasted only less than 100 years. So we can say that the Maccabean revolt, which gave rise to freedom, to religious freedom, to political freedom, and it was led by the people of, or the generations after that, by the Maccabeans. We can see that it lost its sense, or it lost its power, or it lost its freedom within 100 years span. Okay, so this was what we can see was the history, or we can say this was the fourth part, or the Maccabean rule and revolt. Uh, and this was the history at this time, how they gained freedom from the Seleucids, and how Judas and we can say all his other brothers under after Mattathias, they gave a religious freedom as well as a political freedom. And this also gave you a view or a perspective how the Sadducees, the Pharisees, the Essenes, and all these people came into being, whom we read about in the New Testament at the time of Jesus. So we will be talking about even Herods. Herods are going to come in the next section. So with this, we see that the Roman rule is emerging, and the Roman rule is coming up, and the Roman rule is becoming powerful. Okay. So now we end over here with this section, and in the next section, we will be talking about the Roman rule. Okay, so for now we'll end the class over here with this. And I can understand the names are confusing and their names are repetitive, so I'm already telling you, just remember how it took place and what all happened. You don't have to, and relevant names. You don't have to remember every name, but just try to understand, grasp what the history is telling you. Uh, just remember the relevant dates, the important names, especially the Maccabean, the people of the Maccabean revolt, Mattathias, Judas, Simon, and all this, and what they did. Okay, so all those things are important, and how this whole took place, and how they got freedom, and how they lost everything once again. Okay, so all those things you have to keep in mind. So in the next class, we are going to talk about the Roman rule. So thank you, class. For now, I request you all to take notes, and I request you all to view these lectures and gain the knowledge about the intertestamental period from this lecture. Thank you. God bless you.